Good morning, Liberty City Church of Christ. Good morning, family, friends, those who are on Facebook, those who will be on YouTube. Good morning to you. I hope all is well. I pray that God will continue to keep you and bless you. I ask that you will follow the protocols of the medical advisors. Make sure you keep your hands clean and make sure you keep distance from large crowds. And just take care of yourself. We will be praying for you. I will be praying for you. The brothers here will be offering up prayers to you that God will keep you safe and from harm's way. Well, this morning, I want to continue our series of studies out of the book of 1 John, or the letters of John. We have been studying in 1 John chapter 1, and now we're in 1 John chapter 2. One of the things that we looked at on last Sunday was that John gave the assurance of fellowship when he said to them that I am writing these things to you because you have been forgiven, or your sins are being forgiven. And then John says, I am writing to you because you know the Father. And then lastly, John gave the last assurance of fellowship to them by reminding them that he is writing to them because they have overcome the evil one. Now, John, from the start of the letter going on into where we are now, John tells them, or he reminds them, that there is a certain type of love that the child of God ought to have. That they ought to have a love for God and a love for God's word. And then they ought to have a love for their fellow brother and sister in Christ. Then John would say something like this. He would say, no one can hate or no one can love God and hate his brother at the same time. There's a different type of love that John expects the Christians to have. Well, on today, what we're going to look at is another type of love, but it's a love that God hates. It's the sermon title for this morning, and it'll come from 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. And we're going to read those few passages of scriptures, but the title for this text will be tailored, The Love God Hates. Notice what John says in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15. Do not love the world, nor the things of the world. For if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. Many of you who have been, who attended weddings, or you are married yourself, you've often recited vows to one another, or you've heard the bride and the groom recite vows to each other. To death do us part, for better or for worse, for richer or for poor. But I want you to think about something. Wouldn't it be rather strange that the bride would stop in the middle of her vow and she would say, but before I go any further with my vows, I need you to understand that I'm in love with someone else. I need you to understand that I will occasionally love you, but I have to split my love with someone else. I will occasionally care for your needs, but I have needs that need to be taken care of by someone else. I am committed half-heartedly to our cause because I have to split time and a cause with someone else. Could you imagine what that would be like to the bride or to the groom, or even to the bride, if that person were in the middle of reciting their vows and they would say to each other, I will give half-heartedly myself to you in this marriage because I must be committed to another lover or to someone else that I'm in love with. Well, imagine how Jesus feels when you and I give a half-hearted commitment to God and to his Son after all that Jesus has done for us, and yet we come to worship on occasions. We engage in ministries whenever we want to. We half-heartedly worship God the way that God would expect us to. We don't give fully ourselves. And what we are really saying to God is, I love you, God, occasionally, but you must understand I'm also in love with the world. I need you to understand that there is a love God hates. Well, notice what John does emphatically. In chapter 2, verse 15, the first thing John does is he gives the imperatives to not loving the world. Notice this is actually the first command that we come to in the letters of John. John says, do not love the world. That's emphatic. That's it. And it carries the idea in the Greek text that you must cease continuing to love the world. Do not love the world. But now notice we have to explain a couple of words in this text, because he says do not love the world. Well, what does he mean by love? Definitionally, it is a love that is called out of one's heart by the preciousness of the object loved. It refers to a fondness and an affection because of its value, and a desire for something leading to a commitment to something. Now notice what I just said to you. It also refers to a fondness and an affection because of its value. In other words, John is saying, cease loving the world, because right now you have an affection and a fondness that has grown in your heart, so much so that you believe that the value of the world, or the world, is so valuable over God's kingdom and your relationship, your fellowship with him. So he says, cease loving the world. But what does he mean by world? Now, the word world can actually mean this planet Earth, the universe, the stars, the moon, all that is contained in it. The world can also mean humanity. You remember when Jesus would say in John chapter 3, Jesus says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Well, does Jesus mean God gave Jesus to the world, the universe, the planet? No, it simply means God gave him his son, his only begotten son, to the world, humanity, to demonstrate his love from heaven to earth, to mankind. But then world here in this context, John uses the word world to mean a system, a worldly system of things that is orchestrated and ordered, watch this, by the devil. He is head over the world system. You remember when Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4, the Apostle Paul would say, if our gospel is hid, it is hid to them who are blind. For the God of this world has blinded the minds. Does he mean the God of this universe? No. In other words, the God of this world system. You remember when James would say in James chapter 4, James would say, he who becomes friends with the world becomes an enemy to God. Well, what does he mean? Does he mean world in terms of planet Earth? Does he mean world in terms of the cosmos, the galaxy, the stars? No. He is saying that a child of God who falls in love becomes enamored with the world system and all that it contains and all that it offers mankind. He says that person, that Christian, makes themselves an enemy with God. That's an emphatic do not love the world. But then we come secondly to, he says, if any man loves the world. Notice what John would say, do not love the world, nor the things that are in the world. For if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. What does John mean by if any man loves the world? That's also in the present tense, which means it's a continual, habitual action of loving the world. This person who is in continual love of the world, John says this person has made their life surrounded by the world and everything in it. They are consumed with the world's goods. They are consumed with what pleasures the world offers. So this person has so made their life tailored to what the world has to offer. And it's so much so that they exclude God from their life. So many marriages have fallen because marriages have excluded, they brought in worldliness, worldly thinking, worldly advice, and they exclude God. That's the problem with our school systems. They have taken away prayer, and it may seem minute that we would just take away one thing, but to take away prayer, just that one element of spirituality, excludes God from the equation. So whenever you adopt worldliness or a worldview thinking into either your life, into your marriage, into raising your kids, and whatever it is, then you exclude God, and then you become a lover of the world. But notice, he says something else. We get to number 2 in this, and that is the impossibility of loving God and the world at the same time. Now, we just looked at the imperative, do not love the world. It's a command. Do not love the world. Now we come to the impossibility of loving God and the world at the same time. Now notice what John says. He says, if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Now what does John mean by that? John simply means, he gives us an objective genitive, which simply means our love for God is not prevalent. In other words, we have become so enamored, so in love with the world, that we slowly but surely move God out of our lives. And John says, well, when you do that, then you have made it apparent that God's love in your heart, God ruling and abiding in your heart, does no longer exist. Notice what Jesus would say. Come to Matthew chapter 6 with me, and let's look at what Jesus would say concerning the things of the world. In Matthew chapter 6, let's look at verse number 19. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 19, notice what Jesus says. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. But then Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body. And so that if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Now notice what Jesus says emphatically in verse 24. He says, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. And you cannot serve God and mammon, or God and wealth. What is John trying to say? There is a love that God hates. God hates to see that his children have fallen in love with the world instead of falling in love with him. Well, don't we sing a song oftentimes, I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again? Well, that should be emphatic and true in our everyday life. You ought to wake up with falling in love with Jesus. You ought to go to work or wherever you frequent. If you're a teacher in the school, you ought to enter that school building falling in love with Jesus. Wherever you are, if you're going to the grocery store, if you're going to carry out just normal daily life, your mindset should be that I'm going to constantly fall in love with Jesus. When you go to bed at night, you need to make sure you are going to bed falling in love with Jesus. And what a pleasant sleep that is, to know that you can sleep peacefully falling in love with Jesus. Well, look at the reason why, here's some other reasons why it is impossible to love God and the world at the same time. Now come back to 1 John chapter 2. Notice 1 John chapter 2 verse 16, John says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father. Now, John says there are three things that will keep you from falling in love with God. There are three things that will keep your mind on the world and not on kingdom business. He says, number one, it is the lust of the flesh. Now, what does he mean by lust of the flesh? He isn't necessarily talking about our skin and our bones. He isn't talking about that flesh. The way he uses flesh here, he's talking about the sinful carnality and desires of man to want more. It is sinful. It is a passion to have. It is a craving that you and I have. That's the way he uses flesh. Think about it. This body, this fleshly body, doesn't crave anything. It doesn't go after anything. It doesn't want anything. But the me that makes me me, that's inside this old fleshly body, is the very thing that craves. It's the very thing that wants. It's the very thing that lusts after. It's the very thing that goes after. So it's nothing in and of itself that this fleshly body John is talking about. What John is talking about is the innate desires and cravings of man that lead man astray and causes him or her to fall in love with the world. So notice, he also says, but the lust of the eyes. In other words, whatever the eye sees, the mind or man goes after. You ever seen people like that? They always have a one-up on everybody else. They are never happy with the success of others. Someone may be blessed to have a brand new car. They have to go out and get a car much better than theirs or more expensive than theirs. They are never satisfied with what they have. Someone may be blessed to have a PhD or graduate from high school, and that person sees that, and what do? They go after more so that they can top what someone else is already doing instead of celebrating the success of other people. What is the problem? They have a lust of the eyes. Jesus said it this way. I tell you, hey, you talk about divorce, but if a man so looks upon a woman to lust after her, he has committed adultery in his heart. What's the issue? That what man sees, he has a propensity, it taps into his desire and his carnality, and he seeks to go after everything he sees. It's a person who really loses self-control. But then notice he gives a third one, and that is the pride of life. John, in the NASB, it says the boastful pride of life. Well, let me define it for you. It is one who is bragging. He is braggadocious. He has braggart talk. This person is insolent in their attitude. They have a vain assurance in their possessions and in themselves. They are over the top in self-sufficiency. That's the boastful pride of life. They put more faith in their resources than they do God. That's a boastful pride of life. It's they put trust in the instability of earthly things and earthly possessions. Boastful pride of life. You remember the rich farmer who said, look at the barns that I have. I have nowhere to store my goods. I will build bigger barns to store my goods. Look what I have done. Look what I have accomplished. And then at the end of his conversation with himself, what does God step in and say? Thou fool, tonight your soul is required of thee. What's the problem? He had a boastful pride of life. But now, let's notice something. Come with me to Genesis chapter 3, and let's see how these three elements play out. Look at Genesis. Let's get to Genesis chapter 3, if you will. Now, notice, in Genesis chapter 3, the Bible says in verse number 4 the serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die. For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now watch, pay attention to verse 6. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit, she ate of it, gave to her husband with her, and he also ate. What do you see right here in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6? You see what John just described in describing those three elements that causes man to fall in love with the world. Notice, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh. It was desirable, right? It was good for food. She saw it, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh. Now watch the boastful pride of life. She realized then that in her own mind that it was good to make her wise. Look at the boastful pride of life. Now that when you adopt these three elements into your life and into your thinking, guess what takes place? You exclude God. You put yourself in the place of God. You now rely on earthly resources. You also put more trust in your self-sufficiency than you do God. And that's exactly what Adam and Eve did. They put trust in themselves, trust in what they thought would make them feel good or would appease to their flesh and carnality, and they disobeyed God. They fell in love, you can say, even with themselves, that they would go so far to disregard plain commandments from God to stay in fellowship with God. And notice what Satan does. He comes along and he disrupts the fellowship of man, or Adam and Eve in this case, so by getting them to buy into the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Now come back to our text. Another scripture, another story actually that would be good to go back and study would be the man named David. You remember what happened with David? David was king of Israel. He walks out on his his temple or whatever, his castle, whatever you may want to call it. He walks out and he sees a lady by the name of Bathsheba. She's bathing. No problem with what he saw initially. The problem was what the text implies. The Bible says David saw her, but then David inquired about her, which tells me that David not only just simply looked at her and turned away, but David glazed at her. He had a stare at her, so much so that now what he saw with his eyes now married intent. It now married motive. And so now he goes and he inquires of her. But even his servant says, isn't this the wife of Uriah? Isn't this the wife of one of your servants? He's also being warned not to do what he's actually intending to do. But what happens to David? The lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes take over. And now David seeks to do what David wants to do. Then the Bible says David sends for her. He inquires of her, he saw her, and then he took her. And now sin ensues. What a dangerous thing to fall in love with self and the world, and you disregard God in all of your life, your daily life. Well, come back to the text. Come back. Let me get to 1 John again. Notice what John said. John says, so this lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, right? But it is from the world system. I used to have my basketball coach when I played at junior college here in Savannah Tech. My basketball coach, Russell Ellington, I had noticed never really watched game film. So one of the things that I questioned him about, we were getting ready for our championship game, and I asked Coach Ellington, I said, Coach,
how come you don't watch film? I said, we should be watching back the game film on our opponents. Well, coach said, son, the reason I don't watch film is because when I know the system and the philosophy of the coach, I can defeat the coach without having seen the film or his team play. Well, I thought about that and think about that. And I want you, audience, to think about that. If you know the philosophy of the devil, if you know the system he uses to get us to fall in love with the world, well, you can defeat the devil in your daily life, but you got to know what he uses to get you off track. You have to know he will not change this system. It will always be the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Now, he may dangle the bait differently. He may use different bait, but it will always be those three elements that's at work. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. He may not get you with that car, but he may get you with taking overtime that you know will keep you away from your family, which will hurt your marriage. He may not get you with taking overtime, but he may get you with that young lady that you may see that you know is off limits. He may not get you with that lady, but he may get you with a crowd that may cause you to leave your faith in God and to get out there and get into something that you wish you had never gotten into. He'll dangle the bait and he'll use different baits to lure you. However, everything concerning his system will always be those three things. Keep that in mind. Well, notice something else. We get to the impermanence of the world. We get to the impermanence of trying to live or fall in love with the world. You say, Fred, why do you say impermanence? Because notice what John will say in verse 17. The world is what? Passing away. Now, that phrase passing away is in the passive voice, which literally means God is causing the world to pass away. It carries the idea of a movie scene. Well, when one scene of the movie stops on stage, they come and they get the props, take it away, and they create a new scene. Well, John is saying that's the same way life is. And guess what? God is changing the scene. Day by day, night by night, hour by hour, minute by minute, the scene changes. This world is slowly being brought to its end by God. Now, John is saying, if you understand that the world is slowly but surely passing away, then why would you invest in it? Why would you put energy and time in a world that's passing away? That's like putting money in a bank account to clear up the negative in your bank account, but every time you put more money in, it stays negative. Or putting more money in a car that will constantly depreciate. John is saying, listen, you're putting more energy, more time, more focus in a world system that is slowly but surely being brought to an end. Watch this. Not by Satan, but by God himself. He's bringing it to an end. So the world is passing by. It's being caused to pass by or to come to its end. And here's the thing I want you to get. We will never give up the world until you first find something greater than the world itself. The very thing that's greater than the world itself is Jesus Christ alone. He is the greater, he's the creator of the universe, the world, mankind. However, Jesus still reigns supreme and is greater than all, even this world system. Even the things that we see going on in our world right now, Jesus is still greater. And it's imperative that you and I put full trust and commitment in He who is greater. You may say, well, Fred, how do I know if I'm falling in love? I'm going to give you a few things to know if you're falling in love with the world. Here's the first one. You know you're falling in love with the world when the world or any object in the world engrosses your thoughts to where you exclude God. Secondly, you know you've fallen in love with the world when the things of the world become a constant companion in your life. You wake up with the world on your mind. You go throughout your daily living with the world on your mind, and you go to sleep with the world on your mind. The world and its system has become a constant companion in your life. You know then you're falling in love with the world. But then next, you're falling in love with the world when you are unwilling to part ways with the world so as to stay in fellowship with God. If there is something in your life that you are unwilling to give up, that involves sacrifice. If it's something you are unwilling to give up concerning the world, then perhaps you've fallen in love with the world. But then, here's one that grabs me. You know that you're falling in love with the world if you have become discontent with the goods that are in your possession. And when you grieve and complain because you don't have all of the earthly convenience of the world. Do you become discontent with what you don't have instead of just thanking God for what you have left over? Do you become disgruntled about what someone else has and you believe for whatever reason, in all intents and purposes, that it should be you when God is still blessing you immensely in your life? Have you become discontent with what you have? It could be that you're falling in love, or you have fallen in love with the world. But then, do we pride ourselves on making earthly distinctions based on what I have, based on what I drive, based on where I live, based on who I rub shoulders with? If you've made those type of distinctions, it could be you've fallen in love with the world. But then, here's another one. Do you seek to acquire things of the world in a wrong manner or by unwarrantable means? If you have, chances are you've fallen in love with the world. Don't end up like the woman who her husband had given her an anniversary gift in the form of a ring. And afterward, she received the ring. She was ecstatic. She was happy about the ring that she had gotten. She took it out. She looked at it. She put it into the light. She put it on, and she walked away. Never saying thank you to her husband. Never saying how appreciative she was for what he had given. The reason she walked away was because she was in love with what she had and not the gift giver. When you fall in love with the world and you cease to give thanks to the gift giver, God and Christ himself, chances are